So I had a customer's M57 Patrol in here and we tuned it. The compressor cover of the turbo was loose, so it was all operating fine, but at the end of the tune I was actually taking it off the dyno, and how they'd made the intercooler piping had made the screws behind the compressor wheel come loose. You have to strip the turbo to fix it. So he drove it home quietly, brought it back, and he had put bigger nozzles in the injectors and also put a new turbocharger on it. So I got it tuned to suit. Obviously the reason he'd done the upgraded higher output nozzles is because you have to run a lot of duration to make a few hundred horsepower, and with the bigger nozzles at stock duration levels you can actually make another 10 or so horsepower again, far less EGTs, better opacity from like the smoke out the tailpipe. Now I did the last run on the dyno and it cut out. Started it back out, cut out again. So I had a look at the footwell and some wires, and about 20 centimetres there was 5 joins. So we cut a lot of connectors out, did our best with all of that stuff. Happy days, took it for 3 big drives, no problem. Customer to come to pick the car up, cut out driving out the driveway. So we jumped in there, took it for a drive, and then every time I turned left it had cut out. So we actually managed to find a lot more poor connections in the wiring harness and the header plug pins, because the wiring is tied down on a 90-degree angle. We did our best with re-crimping them, sorted out some bad grounds, ran them through to the body. Because these have such high voltage, this injection system, power supply and earths are real important, especially in conversions. And anyway, long story short, we'd think we'd fix it, and then after an hour of idling it had cut out. So what we had to do is do an insulation test on the injectors. So essentially you're putting 250 volt down into the actual injectors themselves, and they should be between 180 and 200 k ohm. Obviously if they've got real low resistance and it's going to ground, you can actually, the motor can cut out. If these drop more than one cylinder, the ECU will kill everything. So the injectors were all over the show. Some of them were 6 times as high a resistance of what they should be, some were 4 lower. So he gave me another set of injectors and I did my best, and the trouble being is these injectors have to be tested at a set temperature. So we kind of chased our tail with that, and the problem was it was at a point that we were kind of saving the client money but still left with, well, most of these are 2 to 3 times out of spec. So I whacked a new set of injectors in it, and they were all bang on where they were supposed to be, and we also did the rail dump because the resistance was about 30% higher than it should be. From a resistance perspective, obviously the rail dump will leak if it's got a mechanical issue. However, how it corresponds with the ECU, if you have it open circuit for instance, it will cut the motor as well. So we did all of that stuff, and obviously we actually had a spare ECU for this one and it would cut out with both of them, but I believe that somewhere along the line the actual poor connections in the wiring harness and the fact that some of the injectors when hot were almost to ground, the tracks look like they've been incredibly hot. So we did miss that issue because we had another ECU at one point and I gave it back to him and said, hey, nah, it's not the problem. We found that issue with the header pins. So we were able to clone an ECU off another second-hand one and fix the issue. However, he is going to have to get a new harness because the connections and the tension of the pins and the insulation on the wiring itself is very poor. But if you are working on these Bosch injector systems, I must admit we were not super familiar with them compared to the Denso ones and that is something that can catch you out. The biggest problem was he'd had these injectors set up and tested accordingly. So unfortunately, if we'd just gone straight to the new injectors, it probably would have been a connection issue potentially only and not had to go all the way down this route. Now, we have worn a large part of the labour expense on this job just because I wanted to see the vehicle going for him and to get the job finished, but I just thought it is an interesting one to show you. And if you don't have an insulation tester, they aren't as expensive as they used to be. If you only do the odd vehicle like this, you probably don't need to go spend $3 grand on a fluke one. We've just got a cheaper price point option, which is about 500 bucks kind of thing. So we are very lucky in the instance with this one. We do have 2 oscilloscopes, so we're were able to scope all the injector patterns. However, it still was a very tricky diagnostics because the patterns that we would get would be forever changing, and the data logging on the ECU is very slow on those older vehicles. So obviously that mixed with the fact that standalone converted, a lot of the DTCs have been removed from the ECU. It doesn't have a lot of the immobiliser stuff's all gone. So it was an incredibly challenging diagnostic, this one. I think Tony and I definitely deleted a good couple of weeks of labour into it. So hopefully a bit of that information is interesting for you guys with M57s, with cutting out issues, high injector leak back, any kind of like fuel stability, voltage stability, any of that stuff can cause these to cut out. You'll read a lot of guys with injector issues and whatnot, and when you introduce aftermarket injectors, an E6C16C1 ECU, when the engine is out of a different car with a cast block and all of this stuff, it can throw a lot of spanners in the work from a diagnostic perspective. I think we're pretty glad to see the end of it. So he's going to do his best to get a brand new harness, and we'll remove the unnecessary wiring, because if you get water across terminals, even if the codes are deleted, you can have major issues going into limp mode and cutting out and whatnot. And once that new harness is in there, hopefully he will have some trouble-free motoring and be able to tick a few things off the list. But definitely an impressive motor, pulls well to over 5k, nice and smooth. I'd still probably put an FTE in one if it was my choice.